going to take on the big story now, and leading off is the Deputy Chief of Staff for Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa, Matt Sabo, who is responsible for the framework of the city's budget 2011-2012, and is also responsible for serving as the lead on the negotiations with the city unions. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Matt Sabo.
So I'm going to try to keep my comments as brief as possible, and so we can have as much Q&A time as we can. I want to say this. The gentleman, there was a gentleman who, in the previous session, made a comment which wasn't responded to that argued that he believed that our numbers were false or fallacious. I actually want to start with that because okay, is that good? Can you hear me? Very good. All right. So I want to start with the gentleman who argued that he felt that our numbers were fallacious. And I think the way that we've approached this budget and what you're going to see when we release it on the 20th, and as we continue to work with labor to try to achieve some agreements that will be able to restore services, that is a basic principle. You're right. If I were you, I would seriously question our numbers as well. The past couple of years has been inconsistent. There's been one story about what our deficit is, on one day, and then a month later, it's $50 million worse. We're going to do 26 furloughs. We're going to do 36 furloughs. What's the story? How many? Are we going to cut libraries? Are we going to restore libraries? Are we going to actually repair potholes ever again? I mean, the purpose of the city, from the mayor's perspective, is to provide service. And unfortunately, as a result of this budget crisis, we've had to face some really tough decisions. And we're not in a place that is in any sense of the term normal, comfortable, something that anybody is used to. So for example, when we're talking about experience, there's literally nobody in the city that has experience doing what we're trying to do right now. The last time we faced this kind of a crisis of this magnitude, it was the Great Depression. And at that time, one of the biggest decisions, one of the biggest money savers that the city council and the mayor at that time decided to pursue was to move to a 5-day work week from a 6-day work week. And that basically, saved a large part of the money they needed to save at that time. So I guess I'll try to back out. I'll try to give you what we are trying to do with this budget, and then I'll leave it up for questions. The reason I have some of these things here is just kind of to illustrate the approach that we have taken. Right. So we've got this massive, which we're now saying is and the reason that these numbers are changing is because revenue estimates are changing, but as of right now, it's $463 million deficit that we're going to try to solve for with our proposal on Wednesday. And when you look at the proposal, when you look at the deficit and you see, here's the balanced budget, and here's the deficit, and here's all the problems, and here's all the services that are going to be caught in the way. When you look at it like this, it seems like it's just a mess, right? And what we have done is we've had these blanket approaches. We're just going to furlough, and we're just going to lay off a bunch of people. And the way that we have approached it this year, and this is why it is critical that labor is part of the solution, is that you can't talk about furloughs and you can't talk about layoffs without talking about the services that are going to be impacted. You also can't say that we need to balance the budget. What are we doing? We're not being very effective in balancing the budget without understanding that there's going to be some service impact. So the way that if you all have this sheet basically, right? Okay. So what we did in the beginning is we looked at what was causing our deficit. And I think, as probably Larry mentioned to you, we're looking at, almost $300 million of the deficit is cost increases that we have very little control over, healthcare costs, increase pension costs, increase salaries which were previously negotiated. And that's the majority of our deficit. It's not like we're adding services. It's not like we're paving a lot more streets or filling a lot more potholes or hiring a lot more cops, by the way. I would just like to point out that the entire discussion of police, in order to hire to attrition next year, that's going to be about a $10 million cost. So when you hear the mayor kind of push back on that issue, when people bring up, well, we'll just stop hiring cops. Well, okay, we could do that, and then we'll save $10 million next year. But we still have a $453 million problem. And when we're dealing with, we're looking at this through the lens of services, I think, that's the consideration. It became very clear to us there was no way we were going to be able to solve the structural deficit, solve the structural problem without addressing the costs, the long-term cost curve. Second thing is that when the mayor approached this budget, look, we've made, we had to make some decisions last year, and we had furloughs and we had layoffs, and they had a extremely negative effect on service delivery. I think one of the lessons that we will learn after, when we write the book on, this financial crisis of, well, I guess when did it start? 2008 till whenever it ends, is that we learned that furloughs are just I'm going to just use the term, they're a disastrous option. Right? Furloughs take the maximum cut out of services. They take the maximum, do the maximum damage to the morale of city employees. And because the city inherently is, it doesn't, no employee and no department works in a silo, right? If you're, the Bureau of Street Services relies on Department of Transportation, relies on Personnel Department, relies on, the city functions, as a unit to deliver the services. And so when you have a furlough in one department, you're causing service delays in 5 other departments. And that's what you all see. And so we're saving a little bit of money, and we're taking this maximum cut to city services, and the mayor wanted to stop that this year. So when we formed our budget team, we also made a change there. I think it's worth pointing out because it does lead to this discussion. We did make a big and significant change with regard to who was putting together the mayor's proposed budget. We essentially have an entire new team. There are very few things that the city charter actually requires the mayor to do. There's a lot of powers that the charter grants him, but there's a few things that it actually requires him to do. It requires him to give a State of the City address every year. It requires him to issue a budget every year, and it requires him to assemble an executive budget team. As part of that order, it says that the mayor can use any city department in support of that effort, because the charter defines the budget as the primary responsibility of the mayor. So that's what we did. We went out and we found and recruited the most experienced financial professionals inside the city that we could find. Our budget director is the fire administrator. Her team consists of the top budget official at the Department of Sanitation, Department of Personnel, Department of Water and Power. These are people who have a lot of experience dealing with large budgets. And the first challenge the mayor gave to them was, can you put together a budget without furloughs? Their answer was no. It would be impossible. The amount of layoffs that you would need to order to have a budget without furloughs would do far more damage to city services. It's just not an option. So we said, well, how do we get there? So what we've done, and what you will see as we're discussing the numbers in terms of healthcare savings, pension savings, the targets that we have set on this pie chart, is that we've said, all right, look, there's no way we can count on a budget without furloughs. We're going to have to put furloughs in the budget. We don't want to have another year of furloughs. So let's put together the budget the best way we can, and then determine what our savings targets are going to be per department and per employee group, and then engage labor and just open our books and say, look, here's a problem. It's not like, so this is my other little, I'll get to this in a minute. This Hungry Hippo, which I actually find to be kind of a strange game to I'm not sure what the lesson is that kids would learn by playing this. It's kind of, but this is basically our, the metaphor for our budget process previously. It's just, we got money in there, and go out and get it, and the people that can scream the loudest and grab the most generally win at the end of the day. But the problem is when you use this process and you got 2 marbles in the pan, that doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So and that's the truth. So what we've decided, what we're doing is we're just being as honest as we possibly can, opening the books, sharing our strategy, and saying, hey, help us. We need help. We don't want to do furloughs anymore. We want to minimize layoffs, but we can't do that unless we address the more than $300 million in increased costs this year that have nothing to do with services, that have to do with the health care and the pensions and the salaries. So if you look at your sheet, you see, there's a, $460 million problem seems huge, right? But, so we started piecing it, taking it out. So we got, we got $100 million for police, and we got $51 million for fire. By the way, that $51 million is the, you're familiar with the modified coverage plan. The department refers to it as rolling brownouts. Also, a far less than optimal way to balance a budget. It is, one of the principles of this budget, we wanted to restore some certainty. If we can't afford the department that we have, we should address it and not mask it by having people out of service when normally you expect them to be in service. So we had $51 million for fire, we got $100 million for police, 2 largest departments, 2 largest cuts. We got, where we got? We got the coalition, $69 million. The reason that we have the coalition at $69 million is because due to previously negotiated wage increases, they were and are entitled to more than 5% raise this year. Obviously, we don't have money at all to give out raises of that magnitude this year. So we were going to furlough them as a backup to, if we weren't able to get a negotiated agreement, 36 days. And that would have an extremely negative effect on services. We didn't want to do it, but we don't have options absent an agreement. We have our other civilians, we have our engineers, and once you start piecing it out, and then you can just address each issue separately, then the problem becomes a little bit easier to handle. We have asked all of our employees to pay for the first time into the pension fund to guarantee their retirement health care. Up until this point, they haven't been paying anything, and we've been providing a very good, strong retirement health care benefit. At the beginning of this discussion several months ago, the mayor had to make a choice, which is, it was very clear, and it's clear to everyone here, and I think even our friends in labor would concur, that we can't afford what we're doing right now. Right? What we're doing right now is not sustainable. So we have basically 2 choices as it relates to the benefits. We can either reduce the benefits dramatically, or we can work with the employees to we can ask them to help pay for those benefits to sustain them. And that was the road that the mayor chose and asked us to pursue. So I'm going to actually stop for now, and then we'll get into the specifics in the Q&A. But that's essentially what we've done. It's essentially the strategy. In order for us to have a budget with minimal layoffs and with no furloughs, there is no other way than to engage our partners in labor, and we've been able to make some fairly good progress thus far. And I'm actually fairly optimistic that we're going to have a much better budget with much more significantly restored services this year as a result of this partnership.
Excellent. Thank you. Now we're going to hear from Paul Hatfield, CPA, MBA, and someone who writes for Village to Village and, of course, City Watch LA, and then Julie Butcher of the Service Employees International Union.
First of all, thank all of you for being here today on this Saturday. I know other people will thank you. And I also want to thank Abraham Lincoln. Because of Emancipation Day, the tax filing deadline is April 18th. That means a lot to me. So without the great emancipator, we wouldn't have Emancipation Day. So too bad he's not around to run today. As many of you have, I'm sure we've all been following the crisis in Japan. And there's a lesson to be learned from that applies to Los Angeles. Aside from the human element, the human tragedy associated with that, there is an aspect of problem solving, risk assessment, and risk management that's going on there. And just to give you my thoughts very quickly, we know that we've had trace elements of radiation that have been detected on the West Coast. We know the city of Tokyo has had variable levels of radiation, some of which have been considered dangerous. Yet, I'm kind of blown away by the fact that the government of Japan and I assume the utility company, TEPCO, they've set a mandatory evacuation zone of only 12 miles. And, okay, I'm not an expert on radiation. The most I know about radiation came from reading a novel by Neville Shute called On the Beach, which I think is probably required reading in Australia.
Yep.
Okay. Also, a very good movie with Gregory Peck. I didn't like the remake that they made a few years ago. So they have this 12-mile exclusion zone, and yet you've got international experts telling them, you should make it 50 miles. I mean, it's pretty much unanimity on that point. So the other thing that perplexes me too is that they really don't know the extent of the damage. They don't know if there's going to be another explosion or another fire. So why aren't they being conservative and going along with the international community and pushing it out to 50 miles? I mean, I could speculate all I want, but I think certainly one of the things is maybe they're afraid of the criticism that they will get from the public if they start pushing people out 50 miles. That could be part of it. Or maybe it's a matter of pride. I don't know. But it sure is suspicious, and it sure is an indication that maybe they need to evaluate the risk a little bit more carefully and consider the long-term ramifications of their problem. So, in a way, we're suffering a meltdown of our own here in Los Angeles, and that meltdown is our pension plan. We are being asked, when I say we, the city as a whole, I mean our elected officials, the unions, the citizens, to solve a problem, and we don't even know the extent of it. There are numbers flying all over the board. I believe I've heard anywhere from our pension contributions will grow to about $1 billion a year to $2.5 billion a year within 5 years. That's quite a spread. And I'm not saying one person's right or one person is wrong. But when you have those dollars, that size of money at stake, and such divergent views, it's time to come together and define what the problem is. Otherwise, all of the negotiations that we're going under right now with the unions, including this latest proposal, will amount to nothing, because we don't know what we're trying to solve for. It's like your high school algebra teacher trying to tell you, okay, I want you to solve for A plus B equals C. What do? Anything you want. But that appears to be the course of action that we're taking. Now, for those of you who might not be unfamiliar with the concept of an unfunded liability, simply stated, we calculate a value for all of the future promises that we make to the retirees, to the participants in the plan. And we kind of state it in terms of today's dollars, and we compare it with what we have on hand. To the extent that the assets don't cover the promises, that's the gap. It's generally considered that if you come within about 85–90% of full funding, you're probably okay. But I've seen estimates where we're maybe as low as only 60% funded, which is a very dangerous level. Think too about, and what I want to segue to next is probably the key assumption in this whole problem is the earnings rate assumption on the assets of the plan. That trumps everything else by far. I mean, we could argue all we want about maybe increasing the retirement age a little bit. We could talk about maybe cutting the cost of certain retirement benefits. But the earnings rate, if it's off just a little bit from your estimate, the effect can be huge. I was reading a study, I think it was done by a couple of professors, one at Northwestern University and one at Rochester University, and they calculated that if you used an 8%, if you used a risk-free rate of 4% versus a return of 8%, which is fairly common throughout the public pension industry, it's really about 6% in the private sector. If you went down to a risk-free rate, you would triple the unfunded pension liability. So just think of that. I mean, potentially, what the city of Los Angeles is recognizing might be 3 times less a problem than it really is. You know, if we're talking about $1 billion unfunded pension liability, it could be as high as $3 billion. Now, I'm not saying that we have to go down to 4%. All I'm saying is we need to get some pretty intelligent people together and decide what that rate is, because we as citizens deserve an answer on that. It's like, have you ever had like a financial advisor visit you at home to try to sell you an annuity? I'm sure all of us have gone through that experience. And but even the worst ones at least offer you a range of returns in their examples. They don't say, we're going to give you 8%. We're going to say, here's how your annuity is going to perform. If it's 5% return, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever. But you get to see the whole picture and how each specific return affects the ultimate outcome. You need to know that to make an intelligent decision. We don't know that here in the city of Los Angeles. We're being told, and also in the state, that we're going to get this, you know, we're going to assume we're going to make 8% between now and forever. And there's an 8%, and they're assuming more or less that 8% is without risk. They are basing that on history. Actually, I think the average return for the past 25 years for Lakers has been like 7.7%. So they're saying, well, look at that, 7.7%, that's not too far off. What they are not telling you is that during that 25-year period, the stock market had the biggest run-up ever, unprecedented. Between 1990 and 1999, we went from 4,000 to 12,000. We tripled the value. Does anybody think in our lifetimes we're going to see the markets triple in value again? I mean, even under the best conditions, I can't see that, and a lot of other experts would agree. So we need to define what it is we're going to use, or at least give the public a range of possible outcomes so we can talk about it intelligently. The other thing that's really causing a problem with this is that we really haven't felt the full impact on our financial condition in this city. The unfunded pension liability is not reported in our balance sheet. It's a hidden liability. But guess what, folks? People are starting to pay attention to it. Moody's is going to start considering the unfunded pension liability when it's determining the creditworthiness of cities and states. We can't hide this. We can't hide behind the cloak of GASB anymore. GASB is the Government Accounting Standards Board, and they more or less let the cities and states get away with whatever rate assumptions they want to make, which doesn't surprise me since at least 3 of their board members are city management people, and there's one that's an elected official out of 7 members. I have another name for GASB, by the way. I call it the Generous Accounting Standards Board. And they're not doing us any favors. I'm also disappointed that there's really no discussion of this possible huge unfunded liability in our financial statements. It's completely glossed over. Obviously, they don't do it because they don't have to do it, but they're not doing us any favors by not at least discussing it. So there's got to be, certainly a very open and very frank dialogue on this whole subject, and we're just not having it. There's an attitude that's been expressed by at least, I think, one union leader. I think it's Robert Schoonover, who said, well, eventually the economy is going to turn around. It always does. Well, he's partially right. The economy will turn around. We will have a recovery. But no one knows what shape or form that recovery will take. We are no longer living in our parents' economy. If you think of it, in the post-World War II era, the United States was the only, for most of it, the United States was the only 800-pound gorilla in the world, in the cage. Well, since then, a lot of other gorillas have climbed into the cage, and they're growing in size. I mean, just look at China. They've gone from a backwater economy to the second largest economy in the world in a relatively short time. Now, this is good, actually, because competition is good for us as consumers. It should produce more affordable prices, but it also creates a lot of risk in the investment community. Gone are the days when you can just invest in the Dow Jones Industrial Average and buy these so-called widows and orphan stocks and get a nice predictable return. You don't know on a day-to-day basis or year-to-year basis how your stock picks, how your investment picks are going to pan out. I mean, I'm sure everybody thought that real estate was a great deal for the longest time, and it was. But we saw that that was unsustainable. So to assume that we're going to continue to get 8%, I think is very naive. So we need to, disturb somebody. So, but anyway, yeah, I'm crying too sometimes. What's his name? Bonner. He does it too. So we need to recognize the fact that the past is the past. What do they say? Past performance is not indicative of future returns. Well, that's the truth here, folks. When you don't know what we're really facing, it's very, very difficult to hang your hat on a particular aggressive rate of return assumption. We need to be conservative. Here again, don't have to get back to 4%, all the way down to 4% like the Stanford University studies suggest. But you know something? 6% is what's used in the private sector. 6% is what's been recommended by Warren Buffett. 6% has been recommended by many reputable, nonpartisan research think tanks, as well as some top universities. So that's pretty much all I have to say on this subject. I'm hoping that in the Q&A that we can discuss this in greater detail. Thank you.
And Julie Butcher, SEIU organizer.
Thank you. So budget hearings will start on April 27th, and whatever you think, we need you to be there. The members of the council that will deliberate on this budget need to hear your input. Now, SEIU is a union that when neighborhood councils were first debated, we took a lot of criticism from our brothers and sisters by supporting elected neighborhood councils. That was our advocacy, and here's why. We believe that if the customers of city services were actually involved in determining their delivery, we'd all be doing better. And so I want to thank the people that worked so hard on this saving jobs, saving the city plan, because frankly, while there are some things that I think are outrageous, for the most part, this is incredibly thoughtful, counter to what would be the normal a very more conservative approach. I think it's very nuanced. I think it's very thoughtful. I think people did a tremendous amount of work and talked to a whole range of people that thought way different things. I believe that's how we get the best outcome. What city workers are about to do, and I'm not sure that this agreement gets ratified, frankly, because many, many city workers are really, really angry, understandably. Now, we can talk about pension reform and throw up our hands because the hole is so big, so wide, and so deep. Or we can figure out how to fill it. What the mayor had originally proposed in terms of a new tier for civilians, I can only speak to civilians. The LACERS plan, the Los Angeles City Employee Retirement System, is currently 76% funded. That includes retiree health. Because when people retire, they're going to need more than ever to make sure that their retirement health is covered. With all due respect, if my house were 76% funded, I'd be jumping for friggin' joy. So, in terms of future predictions of past performance, The fact is that for 25 years, Lacer's returns are 8.85%. This year they'll come in at 23%. Frankly, that gets advertised to bring the cost down. But I don't really understand all that stuff. I want to make sure that the workers I represent can provide for their families when they retire. We learned a lot about what's important to city workers in the process of negotiating this agreement. And what you have here is the details of an extension, the fourth amendment of this contract. We asked our members 4 times to vote on changes to what they thought was a secure, negotiated, wage-increasing contract. It was a 5-year plan in 2007. Whether or not any of us knew what was coming, we acted as if we did. And so in 2008, we started talking about the importance of retiring out the highest paid, less likely to be providing direct, frontline, critical city services. And actually, we were right. As we see benefits now starting to decrease because the cost of providing benefits for the most senior, most high paid, and all due respect, most senior employees, the workforce is now at levels in the city that we haven't seen since Richard Riordan was the mayor. The way that we figure out how to provide services to the people, and so what we'd ask, I know you all talk to city workers, I know folks are really, there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty out there. What we sought to really attempt to buy is a little bit of predictability for people's paychecks, a lot of predictability for the employer. We're not going anywhere. We expect to retire from these jobs. The fact is that cities cannot go bankrupt. We will not let this city go bankrupt. And so what you see is city workers willing to pay now. A new tier on retirement sees benefit in 20 or 30 years. The city, with all due respect, needs the money now. And so for city workers, as you've suggested, I got to tell you, when the folks we were bargaining with said we were going to come up with 11% to secure a benefit that is otherwise in danger, I thought they were a little, I don't know what I thought. But the fact is that city workers are now voting on an 11% contribution. Once everyone in the city is at 11%, we believe that is the best pension reform that we can come up with in terms of paying now for what is a benefit worth keeping. So in addition to that, we're going to close the city down the next 2 years over the holiday, because what we've also noticed is that nobody really believes what's going on. Our own members don't really believe what the city is telling us in terms of numbers, because for 2 consecutive days the number changes. So, that being said, that is for each person across the board a 1.5% pay cut this first year. And so between Christmas and New Year's, plan ahead if you want to get any work done in the city, because it will be shut. Because that's the level of urgency that we have to face this crisis. And we have to do that all together. And that is without regard, 2 years ago we didn't know the difference between a general fund and a special fund. And now we understand that a whole lot better. And I think that's one of those things, we're asking folks across the board to make a sacrifice to keep everybody working. It is a message of solidarity. It is a message of optimism for the future of the city. And I think if this is ratified, it is the landmark win, whatever those sort of spectacular words that have been used. This is really big. And it's a really big step for us to take all together, again, to secure the future and to make sure that we provide the best services for the people of Los Angeles at the best price. That is our commitment. We expect top-to-bottom enforcement, top-to-bottom accountability, and competition that really makes sense. So I'm looking forward to answering questions. We appreciate your support, your continued support of city workers. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Dr. Dan's shy, but he's going to take a question. Anyone else wants to ask a question about pension, labor, health care, clarify some of the topics that come up, or any, and again, bonus points for brevity.
Bashful as usual. It's really 4% that will be added to the coalition workers, 15,000 of them. Helps to pay for their health care benefit when they retire. The fire and police pension plan is already at 9%, going to 10% in July. If it goes to 11%, it isn't that 4% amount. So is that enough to pay for their health care benefit?
All right, so there was a There is this visual. The other piece of this is that each of these pieces is basically. Sorry.
Look like you're going back to your childhood.
I can tell you, I went to Toys R Us last night, and I was there for like 2.5 hours. I was looking just for this, but I mean, the Legos and the Rubik's Cube, they still sell the Rubik's Cube. They still sell Lincoln Logs, and they're still wood. And I was, anyway. One of the principles of this was fairness. We're going to ask the workers of the city, the civilians, and the sworn personnel, all to pay more and all to pay the same. And we need everyone in the city basically to pay 11% into pensions. The same pension system, the same pension fund funds both the pension and the health care benefit in retirement. You're correct. The police and firefighters currently pay 9%. Actually, it won't go up to 10% absent a negotiated agreement. It will remain at 9% on July 1. Civilians currently pay 6%. It will previously negotiated to go up to 7%, and then if this is ratified, it will get to 11%. And that's basically what we're asking the same from everybody to provide the same to everybody. And I think that's as fair as we can be.
More of the coalition people than you are of the fire and police. You're asking even more of the unaffiliated who are at 6% now. So it seems inequitable to me if that is paying for the same type of benefit for all those different kinds of employees.
Well, we're just going by the numbers, and when we're talking about pension.
Aren't there principles involved?
I'm sorry?
Aren't there principles involved?
Absolutely.
You asked me to pay $4,000 of my salary for the duration of my employment. I want to know what I'm buying. And when my co-worker doing the same work I'm doing next to me or doing another job at a similar salary level is paying 2% and getting what I'm getting, I'm wondering why.
Well, I think there's a couple of things. And number one is what were we buying? We're buying stability. We're buying our ability to actually do the job that we're supposed to do. Like, the city of Los Angeles we're supposed to provide services.
Cost. Let's talk about it that way.
Fair enough. We're supposed to provide services, right? And the workers, civilian and sworn, they want to do their job, right? They want to do their job, and we want to be in a position where they can do their job. Not 80% of their job, not 90% of the job, their whole job. Every day, doing the job that they are professionals, that they're trained to do, and that you expect and deserve. And we also want to be able to continue to provide fair benefits in retirement. That is a principle. If you ask for principles, we want to figure out how to maintain the benefits, and we asked of the employees what was required to be able to maintain the benefits and restore services, because that is ultimately the objective.
Well, I hate to belabor this, but there's one more point. All of this money goes into one bucket, and Lacers does not differentiate or does not separate except by actuarial calculation the health care package from the retirement package. What assurances can you give labor that this is really going to go to?
The actuarial cost of retiree health for a Lacers participant is 3.9%, is 4.3%. We are paying 4%. Again, we're paying for benefit to make sure it's there. We learned a lot, about the interest of city workers and the ability to be able to ensure that folks are going to be able to provide for their family after they retire is a significant benefit, and it is one that's worth paying for. And that's what it costs, and that's what we're going to pay. Now, absolutely, you're absolutely right. We expect everybody else in the city to pay their fair share as well. But this is our fair share of what we believe, what we receive. The information on that, for instance, the UAAL from Lacers is on their website. That information is available. The actuarial reports are there as well. They're really boring and they're hard to understand, but you can look for the bottom line numbers of what it costs. Now, we don't know what this benefit will cost when somebody starting work for the city today will retire. We can anticipate that it will cost a lot more. The other thing, I think it's important just sort of contextually, the average civilian will retire from this city with a retirement of $33,233 a year. $33,000. City workers do not participate in Social Security. That's it. So, again, to be able to secure a retiree health benefit, we understand it's a tremendous benefit. And we expect that we'll pay for that for what it's worth. As opposed to attempting to, the idea of a new tier and that we harm the young folks, the fact is we could do that. You destabilize new tiers for young employees, and the fact is that will ultimately harm existing retirees and future retirees. So it's not a stretch, again, to expect that folks will get back to work, provide service, retire in dignity. We think that a basic pension is what every American worker should be entitled to. And frankly, what we're feeling is that this sense of, that a defined benefit, moderate, modest, we're going to make sure that we're not a burden to your families when you retire, is somehow, obscene or unimaginable. This is a basic retirement benefit that we hope to secure for the future.
So, Paul, Matt, and then back to the questions. Sure.
A couple of points here. First of all, I might add yes, city employees, of course, are not covered under Social Security, but you realize that the average Social Security benefit is $12,000 a year. So city employees do have a pretty good deal. Secondly, let's talk about fairness. Everybody seems to use that word a lot, but we seem to forget that fairness is a two-way street. Okay, it's not just employees who are paying for the cost, it's the taxpayers ultimately who are paying for most of the cost. Let's talk about health care for a second. I remember reading a few months ago some figures that were quoted by the CAO saying that our health care contribution in this city is going to increase by $350 million a year in about 5 years. This latest proposal, which calls for a 4% contribution, I'm estimating maybe is going to generate $50 to $60 million in additional funds. So there's quite a little gap between $350 million and $50 or $60 million. So there's been no discussion yet in terms of sharing these ever-increasing retirement costs. So I feel that the citizens of this city are being left out in the cold. Thank you.
I'm up.
Please, yeah. No, I don't.
Oh, okay.
More questions.